Bhagavate Vasudevaya Madashraya Katamrishta Shrinvanti Katayanti Cha Tapanti Vividhastapa Naitan Madgata Chetasaha Madashraya Katamrishta Shrinvanti Katayanti Cha Tapanti Vividhastapa Naitan Madgata Chetasa. Engaged constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the sadhus do not suffer from material miseries because they are always filled with thoughts of my pastimes and activities. Purport. There are multifarious miseries in material existence, those pertaining to the body and the mind, those imposed by other living entities, and those imposed by natural disturbances. But the sadhu is not disturbed by such miserable conditions because his mind is always filled with Krishna consciousness, and thus he does not like to talk about anything but the activities of the Lord. Maharaj Ambarish did not speak of anything but the pastimes of the Lord by Chamsi Vaikuntha Gunanavarnane, Bhagavatam 9:4-18. He engaged his words only in glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sadhus are always interested in hearing about the activities of the Lord or his devotees, since they are filled with Krishna consciousness. They are forgetful of the material miseries. Ordinary conditioned souls, being forgetful of the activities of the Lord, are always full of anxieties and material tribulations. On the other hand, since the devotees always engage in the topics of the Lord, they are forgetful of the miseries of material existence. Right, Prabhus? Whoops. Well, this is a nice verse, continuing from the previous verses. Let's go back. Kardamuni is speaking. Kapila Deva is speaking. Kapila Deva is speaking to his mother Devahuti, who wants to know, how do I go beyond the feelings, the negative emotions that I'm feeling out of separation from my husband, your father, and when you go too, then I'm alone, and how am I going to maintain myself in happiness? So Sadhu Sangha is the answer. So this is the description of Sadhu Sangha. First, it's the principle. Second, the characteristics. Third is the activities of. And then this, the fourth one, the consequence of those activities, when he is absorbed in those activities, the activities of constant remembrance and hearing and chanting and so forth. So there's protection or inoculation. That's a nice comparison. Prabhupada would use it. Remember, he was visiting in Mauritius, and somebody came to where he was staying in Mauritius and gave him an inoculation for yellow fever. Now, some devotees said that Prabhupada would never submit himself to the COVID-19 vaccine because he didn't believe in it. He was like, didn't like it. He didn't have a choice in Mauritius. What he explained was, there's yellow fever going around the country, and the law says that they want to protect people coming from being infected, and so the inoculation is to prevent one from being infected. And he would say so many times, when you're infected by the modes of nature, then you're affected by being infected. You carry the disease. And what's the inoculation against being infected or disturbed? The kleshas. Persons that say, I'm okay, you're okay, that's foolish, because we're not. I mean, they may be able to handle it, ride the waves that are very rough, but there's waves. And in this material world, there's kleshas. And it's not that the person being described by Kardamoni, Kapiladev, the person that's being described by Kapiladev, the devotee, the sadhu, doesn't experience kleshas. They rise above. And how do they rise above? The answer is given. From the previous verse, the constant remembrance of the Supreme Lord gives them protection. Bhakti gives us protection from miseries. So I'll say it again. It's not that the miseries are not detected. Supposing, for example, supposing it's very cold. It's not that the sadhu doesn't feel the cold. Prabhupada would use the word pinching cold. They feel. Prabhupada felt, sadhus feel, but they, in one sense, they tolerate. That's, one level. This Tangta Tiksha Swabharata. They tolerate. And, or the scorching heat, another phrase he would use. And yogis, they would build fires around them in the midst of the hot, super hot summer, and sit in the ring of fire. It's not that they don't feel the heat, but it's one of the purposes is to strengthen their tolerance by extremes. One of the temples I visit, they have a restaurant. And in the restaurant, there's a little lounge, a reading room. And, they have Prabhupada's books in the bookshelf, but on the little table in front where people sit, there's this picture book, and the picture book of different things. And one of the pictures I looked at some time ago was the yogi sitting with a ring of fire around. You can't tell how hot it is, but the image is, it was really hot. And then another image, flip the page, and it's a yogi way up in Gangotri with ice all around him, a little bit of water, and his beard is floating on the surface of the water, and his head tilted back, and he's undergoing tapasya. The cold, and so those are two examples, heat and cold. And so there's a standard where one can tolerate Tangsta Tiksha Swabharata. That's advice from Krishna. But this verse is more than just tolerate, it's rising above. What's rising above mean? It has everything to do with the mind. And when the mind is fixed, then one may perceive miseries, adhyadika, adhidavika, adhibautika. There's a hurricane or tornado, and it's ripping things apart and throwing trees around. It's not that they're oblivious to that, but not affected. Not affected in the sense that the mind stays fixed. And how does the mind stay fixed? Not just by tapasya. Tapasya helps. But it's not fix the mind, because the mind is still chanchala. So how does the mind become not chanchala when the mind is fixed? And the mind becomes fixed by the process mentioned, by hearing topics. So it's Kapila Dev speaking to Devahuti, same message that Prahlad speaks in the later canto, 7th canto, of the teachings of how to go beyond the kleshas, the miseries using the English translation, Prabhupada says several times in the purport, going beyond the miseries. How? By the mind. How? By the mind. The mind fixed in topics of the personality of Godhead. Exactly what Prahlad says. I'm not disturbed. I just remember the personality of Godhead. That's his smarana. He's the prime example, the best example, the commonly given example of Vishnu smarana. Just by remembering, he transcended. Not only he transcended, he was protected. So when difficulty would come, Prahlad didn't deviate from the position of remembering. So how do you get there? What about the rest of us? Prahlad, we engage nicely in the process of Shravan and Kirtanam. And that's what, I'll read the translation again. Mad ashraya, those who have taken shelter of me, mad ashraya, kata mrishta means delightful. Shrinvanti, katayanti, it's the same. Shrinvanti, katayanti, hearing and vibrating, chanting. Absorbed in hearing and chanting, mad ashraya. In this way, taking shelter of the personality of Godhead, engage constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tapanti, sufferings. Tapa means austerity, but austerity from what? Not responding or becoming controlled by the difficulties or sufferings. So voluntary accepting some inconvenience, that's tapa. And when the person, the sadhu, because that's the topic for these 8 verses, when the sadhu experiences suffering or miseries or dualities, this or that, and then oscillating back and forth between this and that, sometimes, the dualities of this material world, rising above the dualities of the material world by higher consciousness, and higher consciousness through Shrinvanti, Katayanti, Cha, Tapanti, Vividhas, various, Vividha. Tapa, again, miseries. No, tapa, can just mean austerities, but austerities from you tolerating or rising above. This verse is speaking of the sadhu who doesn't just tolerate. Sadhus tolerate, but they also rise above. How? They become fixed. Madgata cetasa. Madgata cetasa. They're fixed in consciousness or thoughts fixed upon Krishna. And so how do you get there? So when your thoughts are fixed on Krishna, you just say it again, summary. You can perceive duality, but while perceiving duality, something else is going on. Something additional is going on in the mind. What's that something additional? Mind is fixed on Krishna. Mad gata cetasa. Mad gata cetasa. Their thoughts are fixed on Kapila Dev, or the Supreme Person, and so their thoughts are on the Supreme Person while simultaneously they're perceiving through the senses. The sensors send signals. The knowledge acquiring senses connect to the mind. They perceive something, knowledge acquiring. There's a perception. The signal goes to the switchboard. The switchboard is the mind. And the light lights up. Here's something from the senses. Heat or cold, etc. And then it registers happiness, distress. That's the mind. So if the mind is not processing the perception by happiness or distress. It may be distress in the sense that this cold feels really uncomfortable, this heat feels really uncomfortable, but not obsessed with it. Why? Because the mind is fixed in Krishna. And how to get there? By sadhu sangha, by association with sadhus that are engaged in bhajana kriya. And as one becomes purified, and then absorbed, and then attached, and then in the state of ecstasy, as bhakti progresses, then one is above. It doesn't happen at the neophyte stage, but the potential is there even at the neophyte stage. That is to say, even neophytes can be more tolerant, more peaceful, more controlled in their mind when this feature or that feature of duality comes their way. This perception of the senses, or that one, either sides of the duality, just like matra, sparsha, strikonteya. So there's the beginning stage where one isn't a devotee but trying to come to the stage of goodness. Then one learns by practice to become tolerant, and then as that mode of goodness becomes more pronounced or elevated, then the mind remains undisturbed. And that's this condition called dhira. The mind is undisturbed even when there's cause for disturbance. That's a nice notion, and some persons can do that better than other persons. But generally speaking, everyone has their threshold, a certain amount of pain, or a certain amount of this feature or that feature of duality. It's the position of the mind. I think I'll end with this. The Bhrigu Muni story from the later parts of the 10th canto. The sages were gathered by the side of a holy place, and they were considering who's the most exalted from Vishnu, Shiva, and they appointed or nominated or selected, they requested Bhrigu Muni to go get the answer to this one. So he decided what to do. He had the capacity to travel. He went to Brahmaloka, Shivaloka, and Vaikuntha. And he tested each of the three and found that Lord Vishnu was unprovoked. First was a mental offense, the next was a verbal offense, the third was a corporeal offense, an escalating of offenses. And Lord Vishnu remained undisturbed. Oh, Bhrigu, I'm very sorry, you must have hurt your foot. And went and kicked him in the chest. The Radha Krishna deities at the Brooklyn Temple has a foot mark in the chest of Krishna. Bhrigu's foot mark. And he kicked him in the chest. The deity maker knew the deity that way. So Vishnu was the best because he was undisturbed, and even the others are most elevated. So a sadhu is one who remains undisturbed. They can perceive, but they're not moved by miseries. Why? Again, because their mind is absorbed in thoughts of the personality of Godhead arising from, of course, purification from the hearing and chanting, but mind absorbed in thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is a nice sequence. This is the fourth of 8 on Sadhu Sangha. So the benefits or the symptoms of one who has that absorption is they're not disturbed. They remain undisturbed. They're not caught up in the miseries and trying to counteract the miseries. They may do something if it's cold or if it's hot or if it's this or if it's that. Do something. That's okay. They're not dull stones. But it's not. This is happiness and that's distress. This is miserable Adhyatmika, so they can perceive, once again, but that's not the standard of happiness, the standard of absorption of the mind is not what the configuration of the material energy today. Their absorption is thoughts of the personality of Godhead, and that means serving Him favorably. With that absorption, that's protection from miseries. Let's see if there's some discussion. Speak. Go ahead, speak.
When you were mentioning about being absorbed in Krishna, one thought or one time that I was like coming to my mind often is usually after an 8-hour work day, I like that's the time I find it like most difficult to be remembering Krishna.
Most difficult time is when?
After an 8-hour work day.
Oh, why is that?
It's like the mind appears like it's many times it's very agitated, and it feels easier to give in to urges of like
whatever that might be.
Yeah, exactly. So would you like have any example you could share? How could I overcome it?
Sure. The how-to question, Sadhu Sangha. And Sadhu Sangha leads to Bhajana Kriya. So by getting strength from those that have strength, it will help people who have more strength. And engaging in Bhajana Kriya nicely, you get more strength. Because the being susceptible is insufficient strength. Or Maya appears to be attractive when it's a trick. And when one is not strong, it doesn't look like a trick, it looks like happiness. And so one becomes, so that minus spiritual strength, one is susceptible to Maya's call. Maya doesn't stop. She's the servant. She doesn't stop. So when you're protected, you can say, no thank you. And when you're not protected, then you're vulnerable. So how to stay protected? Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya. And supposing you're not there yet, Anartha-nivritti, just continue doing the Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya activities as best you can. And then, because part of that is prayer, so it's Bhajana Kriya includes prayer. You reach out to sadhus, plural, and that means also the Supreme, who sadhus are serving. You reach out, and there's protection just in that act of reaching out. Be like a little, it's a nice visual. When a child goes like this, what does it mean? They want to be picked up. And as soon as they're picked up, they're content. And in about 3 seconds or 15 seconds, they start wiggling. They want to get back down again. But this sense of being connected is the sense of being protected. They may need some reassurance and whatever else their needs may be, affection and things. But, do this. Start your workday doing this. Start your morning doing this. It doesn't have to be arms raised, but, in the heart, prepare yourself before you just begin your bhajana kriya activities from the morning. You continue to do that, continue to do that, continue to do that, and purification on one side and strength on the other side. So in short, Sadhu Sangha means bhajana kriya and cleansing and restoring, revitalizing who you really are. And that means, in the work day, you'll be more likely to be mindful of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing than just being a servant to the boss or the company or the project or whatever it is. As your Krishna consciousness awakens, you can have that simultaneous using the skills and remembering the ultimate purpose of your life, and not bouncing back and forth, or just turn it off, and then you're drained at the end, or as you're going along, more and more drained. Spiritual revitalization. Sadhu Sangha. Anything else? Way over there.
Raj, we were just reading the second canto, chapter 7, the scheduled incarnations chapter, and
which canto?
Second, 2.
Second canto, chapter
7.
7.
2,
okay.
7. And in one of the verses, Prabhupada speaks about this. He mentions the story of Brighamuni. And when he mentions this story, he says that, so after, he kicks Lord Vishnu, and then Prabhupada writes, the Lord has the sign of the foot of Brigupad as the mark of tolerance. And so, when I read this, I was actually didn't recur to me where the sign was. But when you mentioned that Govindaji has the sign on his chest.
Was it Chota? The brass deities.
Oh, okay.
Not marble deities.
Okay. It didn't occur to me that the sign is right on his chest, but I guess it would, because that's where he was kicked.
Literally on the chest. I can't remember which side. I think it's on the left side. Just sharing. Okay. Something else, yes? You got the microphone.
I could share something from last night.
Go ahead.
It's not really a question, but it's a thought that occurred to me while hearing about Prabhupada and how Srila Prabhupada was always very focused on his goal,
yes.
his mission, and whatever happened, he didn't get
flustered.
Derailed.
Yes.
And so I was just considering the same about, in my life. One thing is often that I observe happening is sometimes it becomes really frustrating when everything's so very busy and there's not enough time to accomplish everything, which seems to be the norm of the way the world goes today. And it's hard to come out of that. And I was just thinking about Prabhupada and how, because he was so fixed on his goal, and my thought process was that he had one goal. There were many, many
sub goals of that one goal, yes.
But I was considering that often I get frustrated because I have so many different things pulling me in so many different directions. And I was just kind of thinking that it's also, one is that if I would just find a way to keep that the main goal, bringing me back from all these other, things that pull in all directions, then it might be less frustrating. And then the other thing was that, I'm not a pure devotee, and my other desires pulling me in other directions aren't pure. They're selfish desires. And that's why I'm so frustrated, because, if it was anxiety just for Krishna, then it might not be as frustrating. Um, and when I was also sharing this with Manini Prabhu on our way back, and he was also expressing that, we're also in a different phase of life than Srila Prabhupada, as in, Prabhupada went through the phase of Grihastha, and he did many other things before he waited like 4 decades before he accomplished the goal of his spiritual master's instruction. And so sometimes as a Grihastha, there just are so many things. This is part of that phase of life, and you just have to tolerate or just get through it. So it's just a bunch of thoughts, really. I have a nailed question in there.
Several thoughts hearing your sharing like this. One thought is, it must be that you're chanting good japa, because you're getting so many opportunities for service. Second, how to manage all those so many things that have come about or come your way because you're chanting good japa, which is, the comment or the observation is hard. Then A and B, sometimes you have to just be patient with yourself, and you prioritize, and this gets first attention, and I'm not going to jump to the 8th priority or 8th option. I'm going to stay focused on the first one and stay focused on the first one. And you've had your little folder or the file or in your mind. I'll get to the other one later. It's okay. And then so it's prioritization and time management, that a skill that comes just from chanting good japa. Super Soul gives intelligence how to do that, because if you don't, you get crushed. So Super Soul doesn't want to see you crushed. And then a third is to be able to say no. And you're starting to learn how to say no. You shared that with me a little bit. And it doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean disinterested. It just means I recognize my bandwidth, and my bandwidth says thanks but no thanks. Because I prioritized, and my capacity is what it is. So it's introspection. And the service-minded person like you and others, myself also, it's hard to say no. But in some cases, you have to say no. This happened 4 days ago. I was asked, "Oh, emergency," and I had to say no. Because. No, I didn't just say no, but it was, I don't see how it's possible. So, with regret, but it was a polite no. It's a little bit, it's not the same. It's just like Hanuman crossing, and my Naka came and he said no, but it was graceful. No, he didn't stay. So those are 3 points. And here's a 4th point. It's a lesson in relation. It's taught in relation to the Bali Maharaj story. The Prabhupada writes that Krishna doesn't give us difficulties beyond our capacity to manage. He'll always give us the capacity to manage, but the capacity to manage might be 2 and 3, time management, prioritization, and sometimes say no. The capacity to say no, nicely, politely, but and respectfully. But so that the higher purpose, Yenamam Upayantite, intelligence, Yadami Buddhi Yogam Tam Yenamam Upayantite, so you can get to Krishna and not get distracted by a sense of doership or a sense of guilt or a sense of, illusion. So that then it requires for you and for me and for all devotees to refine, revisit, reinvest in what the goal is. I don't know if it's because I've made this presentation on the introduction to Naitaka Bhagavad several times. One of the striking points, which is from the Lamrita, but Prabhupada didn't go to Vrindavan to, go back to Godhead, be in the auspicious holy Dham and become purified. It's not why he went there. It was a service. It was a place to perform the service. And he had many options. He could have done many other things. But there he was in Vrindavan, and then eventually so he could get the mercy of Rupa Goswami and continue on with that mission. So things unfolded in such a way that made it possible. So he stayed fixed. And so then comes the question for you and me and all of us, what's that mission? Or I like Viktor Frankl's words, waiting for a purpose yet to be fulfilled by you. You know that phrase that he uses. And that will help you overcome it, in his words, negative emotions or, circumstances that are difficult. And there's a mission, there's a purpose awaiting for you to be fulfilled. So what's that for you and for me and for each of us? And pondering on that, refining, reinvesting, and then, surcharging once again. And so that's the sadhana practice, the bhajana kriya activity in the company of sadhus as far as possible. So what's the purpose of that? To become purified and become more clear what's that mission that's awaiting me. There may be multiple, as you presented, subcategories of that one thing, but what's that one thing? And it's not, service-minded is not just go back to Godhead. Service-minded is, what is it that Krishna wants from me? What abilities, talents, etc., etc. And Prabhupada's abilities and talents were abundant, and they grew and they grew and they grew, because he was using them in Krishna's service. But they grew according to Krishna's plan. So will ours. The seed that Prabhupada expressed in that letter to the organizer of the event included everything up to like the Temple of Vedic Planetarium that was yet to be finished. I just recently heard a lecture Prabhupada gave in 1977 in Mayapur, and he was describing the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. What his vision for that was, it's the same as that seed. People from all over the world would come and get the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by coming to Mayapur. And look up to the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, to show this is the universe in the Vedic. So it's the same. But he didn't have that I'm aware of in 1961 when he wrote Naitaka Bhagavad. But it's just part of the seed. And just grew and grew. So same for us. We're small people. We're not global acharyas. So what's our part? What's our mission? Waiting for us to fulfill in the greater picture of serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then stay focused. Refine it. Reinvest in it. Just Then there's subset things that they fall in place because of the one thing. And some things you let go. Easier said than done, but that's the procedure. Anything else? Yeah.
Maharaj, I had some questions from yesterday's class.
Okay.
About Hanuman.
Hanuman. That wasn't yesterday. Yesterday was Prabhupada.
Yesterday
morning class.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a part where Hanuman prays to Lord Surya and Bali, his father.
Yes, yes.
Now, did he pray to his father because the position of father, or because Bali is a demigod? Sorry, Bali. I apologize. Bali.
Well, and why, I don't know. It's respect. So why was he respectful? Because of this or because of that?
Because
that's your question.
Yeah, because he was
I understand your question, and I don't know the why. But he's a superior who he looks up to. He's not a demigod worshipper. He's a Vishnu Bhakta. Vishnu Bhaktas can be respectful to anybody. So there's his father. There's a demigod who invested in him many powers, etc. So whatever the purpose behind it, it doesn't take away from his Vishnu Bhakti. It's just part of his Vishnu Bhakti.
Another question I had was, there's a specific mention where it said Hanuman crushed deer inadvertently. Now, is there some specific line from this?
No. I mean, when we do stuff, there may be others who are impacted by the stuff that we do. When you're walking along, the Prabhupada's walking along, and there may be some ants or some other insect, and you're crushing them. And it's not deliberate; it's inadvertent. It's just part of. So what he was doing, inadvertently, their living entities were impacted by what he was doing. But it was the higher mission. He was doing the higher mission. So inadvertently, others were impacted. That's if there's a lesson. It's not like great, but it's not culpable because there's the higher mission. How's that? Something else.
I have one last
Okay.
question. And this is regarding gratitude. That one line that says there is atonement for wrongdoings, but no atonement for
ingratitude.
Now, I recognize that it's very important to be grateful.
Good. You got the message.
But what happens is at some points in time, the gratitude reduces for certain things. So my question is, what can I do to...
How to? Here we go. Same answer. Same answer. We're less than perfect, and we're on our way. So how do I go beyond where I am today to towards perfect? Sadhu Sangastaka, Bhajana Kriya, Nartana Vritti, Nishtha. Let's keep going. The regret that you're not there yet. That's a tapa. According to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that's a tapa for a Vaishnava. But then when you're feeling that regret, because I'm not there yet, sometimes there's lapses of gratitude. Now, what do? There's regret. And then there's rectification. And there's reinstatement. Right? Remember from yesterday? The 4 R's? Anything else? Yes.
I'm just trying to reconcile something in the net. As we approach this threshold of the distress, that one, we all have a different threshold. And sometimes as we approach that, we pray out to Krishna, help. Is that an impurity in our devotional service?
Well, it's not. There can be a mix, and the meter that determines mixed or not mixed is for whom are you calling? Who's at the center? Generally, it's mixed, so it's not like selfish, but calling out to Krishna for one's self-upliftment or protection is not in and of itself selfish or not selfish. You can think of some Puranic examples where devotees called upon Krishna. Arjuna called upon Krishna and professed help. Gajendra called upon Vishnu, help. But what did Vishnu do? He delivered him. So now, was that selfish? He tried on his own to get free from the alligator, and it wasn't a long time he fought. And so, was it selfish? In one sense, you could say yes. In another sense, his full Krishna consciousness from his previous life as King Indradyumna was restored because of his turning his attention in that helpless state. So one could make an argument this way, one could make an argument that way. But the essence of the meter that evaluates mixed or pure is for whose benefit? Who's at the center? It can be a blur, and then it's mixed. And then if we no blur, then it's not mixed. See the Prabhupada?